Beet factories were, like I said, a boom for the ag commodity in areas. When they started growing beets, it gave them another crop in the crop rotation. It actually helped with soil fertility, not because of the growing of the beets, but every producers were allowed to have, if they hauled in beets, they got 20% of the weight they hauled in, they actually got back. They were guaranteed 20% of that weight in pulp, beet pulp. So everybody that grew beets probably also had a 20, 50, 100 head little feedlot in the back, probably 20 or 30 head of cow. So they had beet pulp, they had manure went back on the fields. So the other thing was, there was a feedlot associated with the sugar beet factory. That manure was let back to participating farmers for their ground. So you had a kind of a circle that they could get high quality feed. The beet pulp had a 1% sugar in it, and then the other byproduct was molasses. And hell, we still buy molasses tubs and lick for cattle today, but that was a byproduct back then. So they had a readily available, cheap source of energy to add to rations, right available there. So the beef industry, you read it, the beef and sheep were basically boomed all around your sugar factories. Up north, you look, the sugar beets up there, the feeding operations of Montfort, cattle and sheep and things. So they went hand in hand. And by 1915, there were 40,000 acres of beets in the Arkansas Valley. So you got 40,000 acres being harvested by hand, hauled in wagons. 40,000 acres is probably real close to corn acreage. The total corn acres that's being raised in Pueblo, Otero, Benton, Prowers together. I know Otero County at its highest was up a little over 20,000, but it's been closer to 14 and stuff. So you're looking at, when you see cornfields up and down the valley, those were all put up, you could put all those to beets and that'd be what it was like. So that was an astronomical number of acres that was being put in. And they were being hand harvested. So livestock feeding, I talked about the beet pulp and the molasses being provided. There's a picture there on the left. This is the feedlot that me and my wife actually own the swing. So this is right next to the sugar factory. The pen's there, and you can see the river right behind there. And there's no way in hell you can see that river from the feedlot today. First of all, we didn't have the Tamarask. It was before the 26 flood, Pueblo, 21 flood. So anyway, they weren't near the cottonwoods, and that river was way north, is way north now. So it's kind of neat to see. I have a big interest, like I said, we own that feedlot, and there's a storage building or a shop in there, and in the concrete there's railroad tracks, which is kind of neat because Gephardt and Sons, and in this publication that I have a copy of, it talks about them as having one of the most extensive feeding operations in the state. And so you can see there in the upper right, they had rail track up and down all the feed yards in the feedlot there. So and in the bottom there, that's their feed truck. They fed with a train. They would actually, the train would go over to the feed yard. They had a machine that would load it. They'd be loaded by the factory into the back car there, and then it would auger out into the bumps as it went on both sides as it went down the alleys. Then it would come back and that tank on the front was would be loaded with molasses, and they'd top dress that beet pulp. And they finished cattle on basically beet pulp and molasses. Sometimes a small amount of alfalfa, but that was their 100% of their ration. And they fed about 8 pounds of molasses per head a day there. So, and then there was their typical, their write-up about how you can always tell, you can take a lot of acres to finish cattle on the range, but when you sit down with a steak that's been fed beet pulp and molasses, you know, the fat's better, the meat's darker, it's sweeter and everything. So anyway, it's just neat to have that kind of, that's the kind of history I kind of get off on, because it's not well known. Hell, it's right in our backyard, and we don't really know much about it. So, if anybody ever wants to see the exact process for making beet, or for the beet processing, there's a YouTube video, and it's making beet from sugar, and it's a modern made. It's the Great Lakes Shipwreck is the name of the deal that posted the video on there. But it's really just real short, but it actually goes through the exact same process that was used in the early 1900s. It's bigger, it's more mechanized, but it's basically the exact same process. So this Ed Stafford from OJC, he did the write-up on the nomination for the sugar factory, getting its historical designation. And he kind of put together a write-up of the processing. And it's basically, they shred the beets in strips. They're harvested, brought in, and they're chopped, sliced, shredded, and then those are immersed in hot water in the diffusers, and they're tall horizontal tanks, and the height of the tanks has to do with the process of the pulp moving through it and the extraction of the sugars. It's agitated in the tanks, becomes stronger and thicker sugar solution called the juice. The resulting mash is squeezed or pressed. Has anybody here worked in the sugar factories back in the Rocky Ford? Everybody around here has filter claws. We grew up with them. Those all came out of the sugar factory. They were a cloth used for filtering. You go everywhere else, those are canvas, those are tarps. But around here, if you're within 10 miles of a sugar factory, those are filter cloths. So it was squeezed to produce a mash and became the pulp. The pulp was talked about being sent to a drying plant. Of course, in Swink, it was actually put in tanks, and it was fermented for a little over a week. And so the pulp that they were actually exiting the plant was actually fermented, and beet pulp smells really good. Kind of like cattle feedlots smell really good. I think my dad was thrown out of a restaurant in Rocky Ford because he'd been hauling beet pulp. So the juice, it's cleaned and filtered out and disposing of the non-sugars. What remains is the sugar liquid. The sugar liquor, or the excess moisture, was allowed to evaporate, exhausted to steam. And the sugar liquid, now a syrup, or the sugar liquor, now a syrup, placed in very large pans that held tons of sugar syrup. And in that video, it actually shows how they're checking the consistency of it, and almost like making candies and stuff as it gets thicker and stickier and stuff. They boiled it off until crystals, and that's when they actually added sugar crystals to it, which it bonds to, and then they put it in a centrifuge, and it spins out and dries out. It separates the molasses from the sugar. And so, like I said, then it's packaged. Swink sugar was, I don't know, I've never seen any of the, Rocky Ford. I've seen the small American Crystal bags, 5, 10 small bags and things like that. At Swink, I've never saw any of the small bags that have ever been saved. Going into a few other things. There was someone from Rocky, Steve Carlisle gave me a couple things he found in a was tearing down an old house or something. He gave them to me. They were holly sugar letters, and they were from 1945. And so I'm looking just a little bit about holly sugar and the war effort and things like that. And some things I didn't know was that the United States Sugar Beet Association talked about that sugar beets may be the largest source of sugar supply for the future when sugar has become a military necessity for smokeless powders, solvents, chemicals, and industrial alcohol for rubber. So it was, the sugar beet sugar played its part in World War II. And I like this one that talked about, every time a 16-inch gun was fired, 1/5 of an acre of sugar beets went up in smoke. So, there was the farmers of the Arkansas Valley were doing their part. But a lot of the employees that ended up working the plants during the war were women. The wives went to work. We didn't have Rosie the Riveter. We had Susie the sugar maker or whatever. So this is actually a letter where they're telling her that she no longer has a job, that they're not going to hire her back because the returning veterans, they have an obligation to hire the men, so they're not employing any women in the factory. So it kind of showed there was a definitely. I don't think about the way the war shaped with putting wives to work in Swink, but it happened. So. This is basically the sugar factory pretty much as it was when it was torn down, when it ceased to operate in Swink. You can see the immense structure of that building. Everything. This is still there. This is there. That's all Clean Valley. The 2 molasses tanks are still in the back. The foundational rings for back here are still there. But everything from here to there is gone. This is where the rail cars came in, and they dropped beets. They were washed into the plant. But you can see that was a heck of a facility. That was huge, and I can't imagine what it was like to have that operating in Swink.
What year did it shut down?
1959. What had renovations in 15, 21, and 26. 26 was actually, they had the easternmost warehouse caught fire. Sugar, you see grain elevators about exploding and stuff all the time. If you ever get a chance to tour the sugar elevator here in Rocky Ford, that thing is clean as a whistle. You can eat off the floors. That is, I was in there to inspect sugar loans years ago, but sugar dust is more explosive than grain dust. And if you go back, there are a lot of reports of sugar factories exploding. They had a combustion in the warehouse there in Swink, and that was in November of 1926. And they had just filled it, had 100,000 sacks in that warehouse of sugar, 100-pound sacks. And then they also had sugar beet seed in there. The John Fisher Hose Company of Lahana sent their LaFrance fire truck, and it's actually, I believe, in the museum in Lahana right now. It pumped water on the smoldering sugar fire for almost 2 weeks. They said the sugar burnt, it melted, and it ran. So the pumper stopped every day. They'd stop it to add fuel and oil, and they'd fire it back up again and start putting water on it. For 2 weeks straight, it ran. The initial report from the Tribune said that they expected it to take several days to put out. So they underestimated it just a little bit. So, couple other things, I guess. Well, let's see here. That's the sugar factory as it is, basically as it is today. 59 was the last campaign. Rocky Ford, I believe it closed in 1970. Afterwards, the Swink facility, it's been used as a scrap salvage yard or a wrecking yard, fertilizer storage, warehouse storage. Western Foods and Dean Foods used to store canned goods in it, bottled goods. It did a short stint for onion processing and shipping, and now it's the home of Clean Valley Recycling. So, the Holly Sugar Company went on. They had plants in western Colorado, Grand Junction Delta, Nebraska, Wyoming, but then it moved into its real success. Ended up in California. It bought into the sugar production into Orange County. They enlarged the factory in Santa Ana, built new factories in Huntington Beach. They acquired or constructed 11 more factories by 1931. They had a bunch in Wyoming, Texas, and Montana, and they were the largest independent processor of sugar beets in the country for a little while. And I don't know if anybody, most of you probably still remember going into Colorado Springs, I-25, you looked over and you could see the Holly Sugar Building right there on Tejon or somewhere right in there. They were actually headquartered in Colorado Springs for a number of years. Finally, they merged with Imperial Sugar in 1989. It's funny because at one time their stock dropped to like $14 or $15 a share, but when they finally went in, they held out, and when they were finally bought out and stuff, it was like $90-some a share when it actually was bought out by Imperial. In 97, the last of their employees, they moved everything to Sugar Land, Texas. I've been down there, but that's kind of all the real pertinent stuff. But there's kind of an interesting association that you wouldn't associate with Holly Sugar and Swink. But that's the ad campaign that was run with Holly Sugar prior to, I don't remember what the timing was of it, in the 50s actually. So do any of those that kind of look familiar?
Dr. Seuss.
Theodore Seuss. He was commissioned in the 1950s to illustrate their advertisements. So if you happen to have an original Holly Sugar advertisement done by him, the last one sold for $30,000. So give me a call. The museum would like to display it here. I guess that's that's about everything I've got. Like I said, this is all kind of my gathering from hodgepodge information, things I've dug up, things that people have told me, newspapers. I was in my mom's basement the other day and found that we are in possession of much of the blueprints or drawings or things like of the actual construction parts of the sugar factory. My brother found it in the basement of that apartment building when he bought it. So we kind of pile things up and keep them. But you know, the more we know about them, the more we appreciate them, the more we can tell them. There's people dying every day, and when they die, if there's somebody else that doesn't know what they know, or it hasn't been recorded or shared with a lot of people, we lose it. So, you know, I hope that if there's things that you know or things that you come across, I'm really desperate. I'd like to have a picture of Everett Marshall wrestling the bear in the courtyard at the Lahana Courthouse. He used to do that. People have pictures of it. I can't get one. Haven't been able to find one. Anything's of Swink. I've got some pictures coming of the old log cabin. I talked to somebody the other day. We get some pictures of the old original log cabin bar there at Swink and things. So I keep adding and keep putting, and so I keep filling orange boxes and tomato boxes and things like that. My wife loves it. So, any questions? Yes.
Why don't we have sugar beets now?
A lot of it's economics. I mean, you know, they still raise them in Fort Morgan, but that was going to close, and it became a farmer-owned cooperative. They bought it and they operate it now. I guess lots of things. Cane sugar moved in and became a lot more economic to produce. Became a lot more economic to import. And then a lot of the governmental subsidies or support for the sugar system or sugar producers or the companies, there's still, the government still subsidizes sugar production with support loans. It allows them to marketing loans. But that's about the only thing that exists now. And so it was a number of things, you know, increased costs. Here, you know, look at production in California versus production here. When we started, I can remember when I was very little, you know, you'd go out in the morning and harvest beets because it was cold and froze. You'd get them out of the ground, and then by the time it warmed up, in the middle of the afternoon, trucks were stuck, tractors were a mess, and so you waited for the next morning to, you know, Southern California apparently doesn't have that problem. You know, so there's better areas to produce them in, and that's why a lot of them left this area. You know, there was a whole political, some politics or legislative things that affected too.
My mom worked at Miracle Crystal, and one of their largest contracts was with Jell-O. Because I know when I was growing up, you had a lot more powder in Jell-O than you do now because they're all using the artificial sweeteners.
Yep.
And I think that was a large part of the downfall, and in Carter's administration there was also some not as good economic.
Some lack of support.
Yeah, there you go.
Now, still in the U.S., it's about, beet sugar is still a little more than half of the production of sugar in the United States is beet sugar than cane sugar. But there is a lot of cane sugar brought in foreign, and it's produced, like a lot of our U.S. ag products, produced cheaper, under less regulation. Quality-wise, I don't know. You never know. But you know, when they can not have the fair labor type situations and safety things in other countries. So you know, there's lots of not one thing that caused it, but a kind of a multitude of factors that caused the decline.
Does it have to do with our undependable water?
I don't know, up through the 70s, I mean, they could still grow great beets here. And like I said, the quality wise, a sugar beet grown here versus just in northern Colorado, we grew higher percentage sugar content beets here than they did in northern Colorado.
So what causes that?
We're better farmers.
Your cantaloupes are better too.
God blessed us with the right soils and the right changes in temperature from the middle of the night to the morning to the middle of the day. And I think all that has a lot to do with the setting of sugar in plants. So I water-wise, well, and actually water did play a part in it, because when you look at the Rocky Ford, the selling of the water and the closing of the sugar plant went hand in hand. So definitely in that situation, water might not, it wasn't the inavailability or the lessening of supply, it was the increased value of putting that water to another value or another use. So.
Until about 4 years ago, they were still bringing cars in on the east side of Rocky Ford and storing them in those silos, and those silos were full at times.
And that was actually those came from Fort Morgan, from the plant up there. And
But there hadn't been any cars back there in about 3-4 years.
Fort Morgan's, they renovated their plant 2-3 years ago, did a total overhaul, and they're ramped up now. They can run 6,000. What do we figure? 12,000. Me and my brother were going over some of this, and so he called his brother-in-law to find out what Fort Morgan, he works in the plant up there, so he was calling up there, and they actually rate their plant now by how many tons an hour they can process instead of tons a year as we do. But yeah, that's it's farmer owned, and they've made a lot of changes and updates, and they're very successful. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think on the Rocky Ford factory, what I understood anyway is that the imported cane sugar is what the lower price on it killed our market here, where it wasn't feasible to run it. Plus the farmers had bought the sugar factory, I think 3 years before it closed, and formed a co-op on it, and the factory is old enough, or not modern enough to keep up with the other ones. And then my uncle was telling me too, I think it was either Pepsi or Coca-Cola was a really big consumer of our sugar because of how good it was.
I remember walking through, we hauled beans up, stored in the warehouse up there, and I remember walking through the plant after it was shut down as a kid, and the temperature charts were still on the boilers. I mean, a lot of that stuff, it was neat and kind of eerie to walk through. But it was like you said, an aging facility. So